Most people think emotional boundaries are about being difficult, about being cold or rigid, or unwilling to show up for the people who need them. But here is what psychology actually shows. People with genuine emotional boundaries are not the ones who care less. They are the ones who have learned, often through significant personal cost, that the absence of boundaries does not produce more connection. It produces resentment, depletion, and relationships built on what a person can provide rather than who a person actually is. And the behaviors that look selfish from the outside, the refusals to apologize that confuse and occasionally frustrate the people around them, are not selfishness at all. They are the hard-won practices of someone who finally understands what genuine care actually requires. Stay with this until the very end, because the fourth thing on this list is something that almost every person in your life has been conditioned to expect from you. Something that social norms have elevated to the status of basic courtesy. And people with real emotional boundaries have quietly, consistently, and correctly identified it as one of the most damaging habits a person can develop. What you discover about that one thing may change a pattern you have been running for longer than you realize. The first thing people with real emotional boundaries never apologize for is saying no without providing a detailed explanation. Pay close attention to this one, because it is more psychologically significant than it appears. When most people say no to a request, they feel an immediate pull to justify the refusal, to provide enough context, enough reason, enough evidence of genuine conflict or difficulty to make the no feel acceptable to the person receiving it. This pull is not random. It comes from a deeply embedded social belief that a refusal requires a sufficient explanation to be legitimate. And what that belief produces, over time, is a pattern in which a person's boundaries are only as strong as their current ability to justify them. People with real emotional boundaries have learned something different. That no is a complete sentence. That the legitimacy of a boundary does not depend on the other person finding the reason convincing. That requiring detailed justification for every refusal is itself a subtle form of pressure that teaches people their autonomy, is conditional on approval. They say no. They do not provide an adequate reason for saying it. And the people in their lives, after initial discomfort, learn to receive this as a sign of genuine honesty rather than personal rejection. The second thing people with real emotional boundaries never apologize for is needing time to think before they respond. Think carefully about this one, because it reveals something important about the social pressure that most people operate under without recognizing it. There is a pervasive expectation in most relationships and most social environments that responses should be immediate, that a pause before answering a significant question is suspicious. That someone who says, "I need to think about this before I respond," is either avoiding something or not sufficiently invested in the relationship. People with real emotional boundaries have correctly identified this expectation as a trap. Because the pressure to respond before you have actually thought produces responses that are driven by the desire to resolve the social discomfort of the pause, rather than by genuine understanding of what you actually want and think and feel. Research on decision-making and response quality consistently shows that people who create deliberate space between stimulus and response make better decisions. Not slower ones, better ones. People with real emotional boundaries never apologize for taking the time that genuine thought requires. And the people around them eventually learn to receive the pause as evidence of someone who takes them seriously enough to respond truthfully. The third thing people with real emotional boundaries never apologize for is not being available at every moment for every person who wants access to them. Notice the precision of that, because it matters. It is not that people with genuine emotional boundaries are unavailable. It is that they are unavailable at every moment for every person, regardless of their own current state and capacity. Most people operate under an invisible contract that genuine care means accessibility. That if you love someone, you should be reachable when they need you. And that failing to be reachable is a failure of love rather than a recognition of limitation. People with real emotional boundaries have learned what the research on caregiver burnout and emotional depletion has documented with considerable consistency. that a person who is never allowed to be unavailable eventually becomes unable to be present even when they are physically there. The quality of their attention, their care, their genuine engagement deteriorates under the accumulated weight of constant demand. Protecting time and space for recovery is not a withdrawal of care. It is the maintenance of the resource that makes care possible, and people who have learned this do not apologize for it, because they have understood that the alternative produces something far worse than occasional unavailability. The fourth thing people with real emotional boundaries never apologize for is not managing other people's emotional reactions to their choices. And this is the one. Because the expectation that you should modulate your decisions based on how other people will feel about them is so embedded in most social environments that many people experience it as an ethical obligation rather than what it actually is. A boundary violation dressed as care. Here is what psychology shows. When a person consistently adjusts their choices to prevent or minimize other people's negative emotional responses, several things happen. Their own authentic preferences become progressively harder to access because they have been repeatedly overridden by someone else's anticipated reactions. The people around them learn, at an unconscious level, that emotional displays are an effective tool for influencing behavior. And the relationship, over time, becomes organized around the management of one person's reactions rather than the genuine mutual understanding of two people. People with real emotional boundaries have recognized this dynamic, usually through the experience of living inside it for too long, and have made a decision that most social norms find startling. They make their choices based on what is true for them. They respond to other people's reactions with genuine care and appropriate empathy. And they do not apologize for the choice that produced the reaction. Because the choice was not wrong. It was honest. And honesty in the long run produces far more genuine connection than the performance of deference that was protecting an illusion of it. If this is finding something in you that recognition alone cannot fully cover, something about a pattern you have been running that is giving you the framework to examine, this channel is exactly where you belong. We take the psychological realities that most people live inside without language, and we give them language. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the fifth thing on this list is the most counterintuitive of all. The one that looks least like a boundary from the outside and functions most like one from the inside. The fifth thing people with real emotional boundaries never apologize for is outgrowing relationships that no longer reflect who they actually are. This is the most difficult item on this list to defend publicly, and the one that psychology most emphatically supports. Every person changes over time. Their values shift. Their understanding of what they need from relationships deepens. The things they are willing to sustain, and the things they are no longer able to sustain change in ways that are sometimes gradual, and sometimes sudden, and almost always inconvenient for the people who benefited from an earlier version of them. And most people, when they sense this change happening, do something that feels like loyalty, but functions like self-erasure. They stay. They shrink back toward the version of themselves that the relationship was built around. They apologize for having changed in ways that made the original dynamic no longer workable. People with real emotional boundaries do something different. They allow themselves to change. They allow their relationships to renegotiate around who they are becoming rather than who they were. And when that renegotiation is not possible, when the relationship genuinely cannot accommodate the person they have grown into, they grieve it honestly, and they move forward without apologizing for having grown. Research on personal growth and relational evolution is clear on this point. The relationships that survive genuine personal development are the ones where both people have room to change. And the ones that don't survive were not built for the person. They were built for the performance of a person. And allowing that performance to end is not abandonment, it is integrity. Here is what the research ultimately shows when you put these 5 things together. People with real emotional boundaries are not the ones who care least about the people around them. They are frequently the ones who care most deeply and have thought most carefully about what genuine care actually requires. They have learned, often through the specific pain of living without boundaries for long enough to understand the cost, That the willingness to apologize for being yourself, for having limits, for growing, for needing time, for making honest choices, is not humility. It is a slow dissolution of the self that eventually leaves nothing genuine for anyone to actually connect with. The people around them who initially found the boundaries frustrating, who read the refusals to apologize as arrogance or coldness or an unwillingness to prioritize the relationship, almost always arrive, given enough time and enough consistent evidence of what those boundaries actually produce, at a different conclusion, that the person in front of them is one of the most reliably genuine people they know. That what they receive from this person is actually true. Not managed, not performed, not calibrated for approval. True and truth, in a world full of people performing the version of themselves most likely to be liked, is one of the rarest and most valuable things one person can offer another. The question is not whether you have the right to these 5 things, but you do. The question is which of them you are still apologizing for, and what changes when you finally stop. Hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.